So this is one of my favorite times of the year. Been able to help put together an event for all of you that I'm really, really thrilled. The speakers delivered. Everyone has really come through, so I'm almost totally relaxed. A few more hours to go. Now it's my pleasure to actually show you a little bit of an educational video. This is what Gary Shapiro does when he's not speaking at ECF. So if you could roll that video, please. All right, that's a pretty exciting video, and it's now my pleasure to bring Gary Shapiro on the stage. And I'm just very, very blessed that you are my friend, and thank you very much for speaking this afternoon. How did I do? Is that one okay?
We want to see people applaud.
All right. So I have one more job to do before I turn the stage over to Gary, and that is to explain what we're about to do with this upvoting. So all of you, please take a look at your second screen. I pitched this idea to one of Gary's teammates, and they said they think he would like the idea. I was sure he'd like the idea. He's got the knowledge and the confidence and the guts to be able to say to all of you, you choose the 3 topics you want to hear him talk about in the next hour, and he will respond, which is pretty cool. So please, hopefully you see these. Hopefully it's on your second screen. There's, I think, 7 of them on your screen. We can only show 6. So please, right now, well, there's showing 5. Please pick 3. So you need to do thumbs up on the 3 that you want to hear Gary talk about. So please, everyone vote, pick the top 3, and this will tabulate. And in a moment or so, Gary will see this is great. We're giving him direction. So these are the topics. I hope you like them. Uh-oh. How's it look? And knowing Gary, he'll also probably squeeze in a few other things. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Sam. Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it for this guy. He's passionate. He got us together. He makes a difference. It's amazing, and this is his revenge. And I'm honored to speak to you, because when I think of my speaking engagements around the world, I think here I am speaking with my colleagues and peers, the leaders of a very important industry. So thank you for your time. I am honored to be here. It is absolutely terrific. I did promise a big reveal. Our communications person who manages my speaking engagements is sitting now on her edge of her seat waiting to hear what I'm going to talk about, because it is... maybe I'll get to it towards the end just to keep you here. But it's the epiphany I had. So for those of you that don't know who we are, and I always find it presumptuous to assume that people do, we are like the National Restaurant Association. We're a trade association, a 501c6. We represent an industry, in our case, the consumer technology world. We have CES in Las Vegas, which is a pretty big show, and we also are preparing for an event in a few weeks in Shanghai, CES Asia, which gets more interesting every day. And we have events in Amsterdam and Paris and elsewhere around the world, all in essential appetizers for the big Las Vegas event. But we're also a trade association, and as a trade association, we are focused on the good of our industry. Now, we define our job very simply and clearly, and that is to focus on innovation. We have a little bit of a disparity because our trade shows are global. We work very hard to keep them that way. 1/3 of our attendants at CES in Las Vegas, of over 170,000, are from outside the United States. But yet, as an association, in our core functions, what we do, we are focused on American companies, and we call that the United States, and we consider Canada as part of the United States. So we represent, in a sense, to be a member of our association, you must have a significant facility in either the US or Canada or both. So what we do is we focus on innovation, and our job is to try to make sure that innovation can occur. And I would submit that innovation is important to all of you, not just as citizens and an economy, but if you think about it, what's the point of a trade show if there's nothing new? So you have to have new things to have people travel to go to your event. And innovation is really, as I've expressed on this stage earlier, and I know that about 1/3 of you were here when I last spoke, innovation is so central to our nation and our economy and our economic health, I think it's worth fighting for. And what we've done to try to process and further innovation is a number of things. We have 3 books out. One of them is I do not own the book. The association owns the book. We also do a scorecard of states and of countries about how innovation friendly they are. So we have criteria, which we lay out there very objectively on our website, and we say, if you do these things, you are more likely to be innovative. If you have good broadband speeds, if you have a highly educated population, if you are diverse, because that's what's great about the US, you may not think about it that way, but we're one of the most diverse countries in the world, because we're an immigrant country in a sense. You all will do better. You'll have different views around the table. We look at education, we look at tax laws, we look at all sorts of policies, and for both the state ranking and the global ranking, we look at also, are you welcome to new business models? Are you welcome to Uber and Lyft and Airbnb and Pandora and all sorts of home sharing, capital sharing, all sorts of other things? Are you looking at adopting 5G? Are you doing the right things? Are you trying to save legacy industries? Or are you trying to expand into new areas? Because if you think about it, that's what's made our nation great, is that we've been so willing to embrace the new. In fact, I'd say we have a bias towards the new in many different ways, and that's what helped make us different. And so we like things that are new as a country. Our kids like them. It's the culture we have. I've talked about that before, but it's something which pervades and is worth repeating. And sometimes we don't focus, and I know that this is an international crowd in part, but for the Americans here, we don't focus on the good things we have in terms of our pro-innovation policies. And in fact, the results prove us out. If you look at unicorns, which is one of our criteria, a unicorn is a company that's relatively young, that has over $1 billion valuation. We have more than any other country. Second is China. Third, though, is is very scattered. Europe has almost none. So I don't want to offend anyone here from Europe, but what you have to ask yourself, why does Europe have so few unicorns? Europe has more population than we do, as the United States, and it's certainly a great history, but why do they have fewer? And our view is it's a combination of many things. They focus on regulation, and individual rights greatly, which we share culturally, and I'll get to that soon. But they also, they do suffer from many different languages, and we pretty much have one language here. So especially in the internet space, it's a lot easier to introduce things in one language than it is to have 28 or so different languages. And it's also cultural. Our culture encourages, in a sense, risk and failure, which was last night I was in Naples, Florida, and I was invited to attend yesterday and today, but I wanted to be here for Sam. Bill Gates has started a new fund, a new investment fund, and it's focused on actually saving the environment. And it's fascinating. So during the day yesterday, I heard from all sorts of every company that they've invested in is headed by this major PhD, and they have people select talking about PhDs, and they're talking about solving all the environmental challenges in building, in energy, in transportation, and they had roadmaps for each of them. And the guy who's running the fund, who's one of my board members, and invited me to attend, actually was talking with one of these most successful investors in the country. And there was a number of billionaires there, David Rubenstein of Carlyle Group, and also Bill Gates was there, who's an old CES speaker and exhibitor. And one of the discussions that occurred was between two people who are central to this. And one of them was saying, I'm concerned about what you're doing with this fund. You're not taking enough risks. And that's what we have to do. You have to take risks. And he said, I don't invest in anything in certain areas if it's from someone in the industry. Because once you're in an industry, you don't see outside the box and take risks. And I thought that was a fascinating insight, listening to this dialogue between these two great investors and people, phenomenally successful, each in their own right, and talking about how you proceed and break things down. And I was playing with that in my mind because I noticed that a lot of the most successful companies in the United States are now headed by immigrants or by someone who came here, in a sense, to head a company. And I was thinking, because I was speaking on Friday with the CEO of Best Buy, or the chairman, he's moving to chairman in a few weeks, and he's from France, and he was telling me, he was thanking me, it was touching on Memorial Day that he was thanking us as Americans for all we've done for the cause of freedom. And I was thinking that here we are importing people who could come in and redo a company or start a company and things like that. And part of it is they don't have the human relationships which make change difficult. I mean, obviously, if you're coming in and restructuring a company, that's difficult. But also, it's just a different mindset. And so why is that? So one of the things, I am finding and retaining a ninja staff. Okay, now I have to, this is what you want me to talk about, ninja staff? I do have a ninja staff, and I want to talk about that. So this book is a ninja book. The last book was called Ninja Innovation. Both did phenomenally well. I'm really proud of that. And then the reason it was called Ninja has to do with the fact that I have a black belt in karate, Taekwondo to be exact, which is actually Korean art form, and my former wife and two sons and I studied karate together because our sons were watching Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. How many of you have seen Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? Okay, about half of you. Well, it was pretty popular a while back, and our kids bugged us, and we relented, and the deal was we would do it with you, which was very humbling to have my 4- and 5-year-old sons, like since I traveled a lot, as you all do, actually have to teach me the moves because I was missing so many of the classes. But we all got black belts. But since then, I mean, the point I got out of karate was not necessarily the physical thing, although it was pretty grueling, especially the black belt test, but rather the way of thinking was that you don't really, I mean, you were trained not to use the actual physical skills. You were trained to get out of a bad situation and use your mind as much as anything. And the physical fighting was, you were taught and ingrained from day one, was the very last resort. Now, ninjas were ancient Japanese fighters, and what they did is that they were totally outgunned, outmanned, out everything, out uniformed. Their opponents always had more money, but somehow they always managed to win. So what did they do is they did certain things as team building, in a sense, that mattered. They would recruit for the skills they needed. They didn't recruit people that were just like them. I mean, obviously, you have to have a passion and be willing to do what they were doing. But they looked around and they assessed what their weaknesses were and said, let's get people like that. And that applies to the workforce for you as well. It's the toughest thing to do, and it goes to diversity and inclusion. But really, one of the things that I think makes us great as a country is the fact that not only do we have people that are different, but we recognize the value of our differences is that we can come up with new ideas because we have different contexts, different upbringings, different cultures, and that's a really important thing to do. And it takes a lot of emotional self-awareness. You have to know, as leaders, you have to know your own weaknesses, and you have to be honest with them. And if you can't do that yourselves, you should go out to other people, and you should ask about you, what's your strengths, what's your weaknesses. I was reading yesterday about a CEO that basically would hire people outside to evaluate himself as a CEO and do a 360 and prepare a written report, and he'd open it, and he said he shared it with his board every time he did it. He said it was always good, but there were weaknesses he had, and he would hire around those weaknesses. So that's one of the first things that ninjas do. And the second thing a ninja would do is they're problem solvers, if you will. You see a new situation, and there's an old statement that once you hit the battleground, all your plans go away. So you get into the battle, and something new will happen that you didn't anticipate. That's why I was chuckling at the 5-year discussion earlier today, because I doubt what you saw up there is going to be relevant in 5 years, because we're going to be hit with things globally that are out of our control in a way that we'll have to adjust and deal with. I mean, and I try to talk about this in the book a little bit because, there are known knowns. We know what's happening. We know what's happening with technology, and I talk about that in the beginning of the book. We know that with self-driving cars, on the way to them at least, continuously. We know drones will be big. We know artificial intelligence is going to grow. We know there's going to be debates over privacy. It's a trend. There's going to be massive debates, and some of that may slow down innovation. We know about so many things that are changing quickly in healthcare. We know about different ways of treatment, evaluation. We know that we're going to a physical cliff. We know all these things. Those are the known knowns. And then there's things we don't know, but we know we don't know them. We don't know how fast any of these things will happen. We don't know if government will get in the way. We don't know if we should really care. We don't know about cultural changes. We don't know about what's really going to happen politically. Will we become more isolated? We don't know all these things, but we know they're risk factors for us. But the ones that get really tough are the unknown unknowns, the things we don't know and we can't even anticipate. And that's just life. You just deal with them. If someone told me 5 years ago we'd be in the situation we're in today, where we have a president that is putting up an economic fence around our country, I would have said, oh, come on. What, are you kidding me? Or a president that doesn't read, to be honest, and the facts don't matter. So, I mean, that's a fact. He doesn't read. I mean, I don't think anyone will claim that he does. Or that you have a chief economist sitting in the White House who today in the Wall Street Journal basically argues that tariffs are good. I mean, there isn't an economist I've ever met in my entire life, and I have an economics degree, that thinks tariffs are good. And, what happened in the 1930s with Smoot-Hawley is several thousand economists said, this is really bad for the country. It'll make this recession. We're in a total depression. It's front page of the New York Times. Several thousand economists sign on to a letter. And yet we have the same situation today where you have several thousand economists, or others have said they can't find another economist that agrees with this person who's in the White House now, who calls himself an economist, and says tariffs are good. So situations develop, and we have to respond to them. And that's important that we do it in a way which makes sense and preserves ourselves or makes us better. So the other aspect of a ninja is, so you have to respond to these things that you don't know, and you have to do it in a way that makes sense, and you have to do it in the middle of action. As someone says, it's like fixing an airplane while it's flying. It's a difficult thing to do, but that's what we're going to have to do, those of us that run events, because things are going to happen pretty quickly. That's my prediction there that's not in my book, because it's a very rapidly changing world. And it was just pointed out yesterday at the Gates event. If you look at how World War I started, it was just a simple misunderstanding, that occurred. And we're having those, it seems, every few days of misunderstandings, lack of communication. So in terms of getting employees, I don't pretend to be an expert on finding a ninja staff. I didn't even know where that came from, but I guess it's good to talk about. But I'll tell you what we do, because that's my only experience. I'll be honest, I'm one of the rare people who's essentially been at the same organization my entire career. When I was in this town, I worked on Capitol Hill. I went to a law firm. The law firm had a client. It was the association. And as a law student, I was almost working full-time for the association. After a couple years as an associate at a law firm, with working almost full-time for the association, they offered me what I thought was a dream job. And I only thought it was a dream job because I went to the CES, and I was like, I want to be part of that. Nothing is more exciting to me than a trade show. And I know that many of you share my passion. It's such a 5-sense experience that is like nothing else, with all the media and all the technology, and I'm the paid cheerleader for the technology industry. Nothing is better than that live interactive experience where you could see, smell, sense, feel, touch, and hear, and you can evaluate people and new products and services offerings in a way you can't do. Your mind just can't do that with technology, even with all the beauty of the internet and all the randomness. And not only does a trade show have that ability to evaluate with all your senses and form a gut reaction, which is also important, it allows the value of serendipity, which frankly the internet, I guess you could randomly find things in the internet, but serendipity is one of the great experiential things it's only a trade show could replicate. That's how companies get into new businesses. In fact, I would submit to you that's what innovation is all about. It's about putting two things together that you have not put together before in a way that has value. And if you think about some of the best things you've done at your events and at your shows and your conferences, it probably was pretty random in that you just linked up something saying, why wouldn't you do that? Or you come to a conference like this one and you see someone or you talk to someone or you hear someone and say, we should be doing that. I mean, the trade show industry, I think what Sam Littman taught me. It's the one industry where you go to each other's events and you see what they're doing and you borrow the best stuff, and it's considered pretty cool. You're not viewed as immoral or unethical because we don't have there's no such thing in the law as a copyright on ideas. And so we got, for years, Sam and I resisted selling sponsorships. We had this pure view of the show as we do it, and all the programming is free, and we want to keep the pristine and a fair playing field for everyone just by exhibit space. And slowly, piece by piece, we were convinced. And what we found is, first of all, not only did the sponsorships and banners make a more exciting experience, but also, when we started putting a value on the conferences, the higher we priced them, the more people attended, which was a lesson for me, and perhaps for Sam. I'm trying to remember if Sam was with us then. I don't remember. He's shaking his head no. He was the old guy then that did it the old way. And he's the one who convinced me to stay with the old way. Then he left, and we got someone else who let us change. It's always blame Sam. So in terms of keeping a staff, what do? What we try to do is get the best and brightest, honestly. We're in a position, as a nonprofit, there's an advantage. There's disadvantage and advantage. I know the room is split. So a for-profit has that's why I was so interested in the last panel that went on with the NRA, essentially selling out in part to private equity, is that when you're the private organization, the advantage is there's a lot of secrecy in a sense of compensation. Our compensation numbers, for the most part, are public, especially because of the law, because we don't pay taxes. So, but there's also, you can own equity. You could get a piece. You could own it. Like, as much as the CES has grown in value and things like that as a nonprofit, I think it's great and wonderful. I'm really proud about it, but I don't own any of it, and that's life. That's what I bought into. In return for not paying taxes, we make our tax returns public. We have all these restrictions on what we can do. But we could also, when we make money, we could also be nicer to our employees in different ways. We give all our employees $25,000 towards buying a home within 5 miles of our office. And we do that in a 3-year forgivable note. 3 years, honestly, is a little bit of a silver or gold handcuffs. But we also found that the biggest problem they had, according to our research, was their commute in this area. And this allows people to buy their first home, which we think is really important and valuable. It's also unique. But we do a lot of other things as well. But generally we do a lot of surveying of our own staff, and we've won a lot of awards. It's the healthiest place to work, the most family-friendly, and the best place to work by many criteria, many organizations. But that's one of our goals, by the way. So for the last over 20 years, every employee is on incentive compensation. We have very specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, timetable, SMART goals. And this is laid out in my book if you're more interested. I've also written a couple articles about it. But what we do in terms of the staff, though, is not, all that's very nice. I think it's important. I think it's important to have goals. But what we try to do is have a culture of innovation, culture of challenge, a culture of good ideas can come from anywhere, from any employee, from anybody. One of the things, actually, our board members remind me of more than I even remember, is what happened in 2006 and 2007. We knew a recession was coming. Just what I'm telling you right now, a recession is coming. I'm not sure you heard it here first. I saw it on the board. But when you know a recession is coming, you should plan for it. We actually did a hiring freeze in, I think it was 2006, even though there was no reason to. Our show was growing. But it just seemed obvious to me. And I remember at the time Las Vegas wanted to not expand their convention center. They wanted to redo their convention center and have 3 years of I'm looking at Lori Lutz, our vice president of operations. They wanted to totally redo it while we were there, and it would take 3 years. And I remember I had tears coming down my cheeks, crying with Rossi Rollencutter on the telephone not to do it because the recession was coming, and 3 years of disruption would cause our show to erode rapidly. We'd lose exhibitors who were looking for any excuse to say, oh, we'll pass this year. And fortunately for us, it took a while, but they agreed not to do that, and they're doing it much wiser now, building a new building and then remodeling the old one. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
While you're talking about staff and taking a sip, do you want to now or later on talk about how CTA does diversity and inclusion?
How we do diversity and inclusion. Well, the irony is, since people were talking about earlier today, we've had our issues. Has anyone heard of any issues we've had, by show of hands, in the issue of women friendliness of our show? Oh, very few of you. Well, I'm not going to bring it up then. I'm happy to talk. Actually, I'm not that happy to talk about it. We had our issue, the same one as discussed earlier with the cyber event. We had last year we announced 3 male keynoters, thinking our credibility was so high, we didn't even think about the fact of order that we announced things. And you would think I don't know, there was a USA Today story that said it's a #MeToo thing and had my name in there. And I was like, you're kidding me. Me? I'm like the best guy ever for this stuff. I mean, I was on the board of George Mason University, and I wouldn't give tenure to anyone unless they got sexual harassment training. And that was like 20 years ago. I started them on that path. I have a staff that's mostly female. Over 2/3 or so of our staff at every level, including vice presidents and above, is female. Hey, I'm married to a woman who's like, I've heard from her about discrimination in her world of medicine. So I was a little taken aback, and I took it very personally, and we do what we can, but we agreed on 2 things. We wouldn't lower our standards, but we would make a hell of an effort, even though we've been making efforts. And for years, by the way, we had a rule that our panels had to be diverse. We almost achieved it all the time, and that we wouldn't let this is all before any of this happened, we wouldn't let our staff appear on any panel if it didn't have at least 1 female on it. I have to admit, we had an interesting situation arise when we hired a very accomplished African American who, like, within 2 weeks of the job, was asked to go to the White House and be on a panel. And, like, the problem was it was an all-male panel, so the rubber hit the road. And I'll be honest, we said, go ahead. This doesn't it seemed really ridiculous at that point. But I thought we were pretty good is what I'm trying to say. So in terms of diversity and inclusion, what we've done so many different things. We announced that we have a $10 million fund to invest in women-headed and traditionally underrepresented, minority-headed or owned startups or close to startups. Now, we're not doing that by investing in companies because it really costs because, like, who do you invest in? If you invest in companies in your industry, you're creating your own competition. Your members may not like that. Invest in companies outside your industry, what's the point of it? So we said, it'd be a lot easier to just give it to funds that invest in anything they want, but here's the criteria. It has to be women and minority-headed or owned. So that's what we've done. We're about to announce our first fund we're contributing, and then we have a few more announcements after that. But that's going really well. But we've also done a number of things at our show as well to make, we sat around, brainstorm, we partner with others, we've talked to people who've criticized us and said, what is it we can do differently? Especially in an industry like cybersecurity. I don't think we're as bad as cybersecurity in terms of the male percentage. But we don't even have good numbers on what our percentages are because, with 175,000 or so people coming, we don't know if they're female or male. We know what country they're from. We know what they're interested in. We just tried asking our speakers, because this has been an issue, what sex they are, and we didn't get a good response. And it's a weird type of thing to ask someone. And we do have diversity of speakers as well, and I mean it's not binary often whether they're female or male. So our numbers aren't perfect on that, and we don't even know what our attendance is, but we could guess, and we do that. But we're always trying to do better. We have a code of conduct. We keep tightening it. I heard the phrase, I even hate to say it because it sounds like a dirty word to me, booth babes before. I'd say Karen Chupka, who's many of you know, our executive vice president of CS, her and I have this thing about that phrase, because if you talk to some of these booth models, male or female, they're highly trained, they're on their feet for several days, they're dealing with difficult situations, they have to be, every one of you hopefully has worked in an exhibit. It's tough to be working in an exhibit all day. And to call someone and denigrate their occupation and calling them a booth babe is, to me, very offensive. And Karen and I have this campaign to try to tell the press that just using that phrase is annoying. But you can do, and we will do, and are doing, have discussions about how people are dressed. But you've diverted me totally, because that's not what, nobody wanted to talk about that subject.
It's on me, Gary.
All right, it's on you. All right, so in terms of a staff, what we do is some of the things I mentioned. I'm happy to talk about some things, and there is more of a discussion in the book about it if you're interested. But definitely, it all starts with employees. Every one of you know that. The biggest thing I could say is that when you're interviewing people, don't interview people who look and act like you. You have to be as conscious of your own prejudice as possible. Because it's just like even at our board nominating committee meetings, the phrase I hate, oh, he's a good guy. that phrase grates me also. It's like, I don't care if he is a good guy or a great guy or whatever. First of all, having a guy right away is not the best thing to have, because actually there's a lot of research which shows that having women are better in board settings, especially once you hit the magic number of 3. Having 1 or 2 just doesn't do it. And I don't mean like a board like I heard about earlier today with the NRA, or the home builders. That's a whole nother story. But I think the diversity of thought is also what's helped make us successful as an organization. That goes to keeping a mega show relevant and efficient. Is that what I'm supposed to be talking? Oh, okay. Are these the 3 subjects at one?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
I made them pretty.
Oh, awesome. So keeping a mega show relevant and efficient is actually, first of all, having a governing structure and a staff. So staff, we've talked about. A governing structure, I want to talk about that for a second. Those of you, especially in the association world. Or actually not. It doesn't matter, really. I've dealt enough and been on commercial boards or private company boards. What you want in a board is the board is not your enemy. And a lot of association executives and CEOs treat them as the enemy. Like, we could put this over. Our board doesn't know that. Or does this go to the board? What I try to do with our board is just to tee up the most important issues in a way where I need help. Please help me. Please come up with good ideas. An example of that is that we felt we needed to change our name as staff. The Consumer Electronics Association, which we used to be called, didn't really work for us. And we felt it was not allowing us to get into the areas that were hot that we wanted to get into, like Uber and Lyft and Airbnb and companies like that, and all sorts of all the internet services and things like that. We were viewed as old school. Electronics sounds old to me. So we had all these ideas, and we presented 3 of them to the board. One was to not change our name. Another was to change just to the Electronics Association or the Technology Association. And our board actually came back with something we hadn't thought about as staff. Was that if you keep the name consumer, it will be limiting. It'll limit you in the B2B world to a certain extent, but you can get over that by just what you do, which is the next subject, what we've done at CES. But the opportunity there is consumer has a halo effect on it. People think consumers are good. I mean, we don't, as sometimes people think, we don't have consumers as members. But the fact that consumer is in your name is a halo effect, and it was like, yeah, that makes sense, and thus we changed our name. That's one example of probably 50 or 60 I could give to you where our board has actually had a serious discussion at a high level and come up with something that is a good decision. So the reason we've succeeded is as an organization and a show is I'm not stupid enough to think I'm so brilliant, or even our top people are the mega golden team of the world. It's rather that we've caught an industry, and we've seen it growing, and we've tried to capture every element of its growth. And we did so with a governing structure and a board. And some of this is the board has confidence in us, and we have confidence in them. And we also, the board, it was wise enough at one point is to kill itself, essentially, and say there's term limits for everyone. Here's what we do. Not everyone. I don't have a term limit yet. So the staff is not term limited, but the board members are, and then we refresh and we refrain and we focus on the big picture, and we've done okay. But keeping a mega show relevant and efficient, I mean, the reason I attend some of these sessions with a little bit of a grain of salt is like there's some things that seem to come up all the time, like concern about technology, and I mean, every month someone's trying to sell me a virtual show, and I'm so thankful that I've never spent a penny on that because. Everyone, it'll be so great, it'll be so wonderful. But the truth is, and I think we discussed this a few years ago, a virtual show is something where maybe is anyone here making a virtual show work? Anyone at all? By a show of hand. Not one. Okay, there you go. So I guess the way I introduced it probably wasn't conducive to hand raising. So there's an example like, and the other thing is, technology is going to make trade shows obsolete. I mean, every conference in the last 25 years, there's been that discussion. And then there's all these trends that people jump on. My favorite was when Sam and I were kind of early on. Oh, boy. I'm not allowed to talk about this?
Oh, no, go ahead. I'm just bringing back memories.
He's thinking back. We went to our board meeting in 1995, and our summer show in Chicago wasn't doing very well, and someone had an idea. Let's open to the public. Yeah, all in favor, aye. It was like Sam and I walked out like, what? We're opening our show to consumers? Can we talk to some of our bigger exhibitors first?
And this was 6 months in advance.
Yeah, 6 months of hell.
Right.
And the funniest thing was, all of a sudden, we did it, and we did it I think we did it as well as we possibly could have. There was very little security issues. We publicized it. People showed up. Most exhibitors were kind of happy. Made it exciting. It was new. But then all of a sudden, Sam and I were on the speaker circuit for conferences like this one. Not this one, which didn't exist, but everyone said, public shows are the next big thing. Like, what? Really? But they weren't. You know, we did that, I think, for 2 years, and we said, this isn't working. And we moved on, and now we have, instead of 2 shows a year in the United States, we have 1 big show. So, having seen one show decline and watched other shows decline, number one, paranoia is a real feeling and healthy. I don't think complacency is, I fear complacency as much as I fear anything. And our staff will say that. I'm always talking about that. I'm a big believer in that only the paranoid survive. Having seen other mistakes that others have made and mistakes we've made, shows do go away. I was really impressed because Jeff Bezos was a few blocks from here a few months ago, and I had the chance to hear him speak. And what he said was, I know Amazon's going to go out of business. I just want to delay it by 25 years so we last like 75 years instead of 50 years. I mean, there's a long-term vision, because the truth is, as we all know, every one of our entities is in jeopardy in the long term. And, business has changed, and you can just look at the Fortune 100 or the Dow from 50 years ago. The replication there and the survival is very limited to a handful of companies.
I'd like to ask you to go back 1 second.
I'm sorry.
Give you a chance take a sip. You talked about virtual shows. Nobody raised their hand because, again, the way you teed it up. But
oh, Sam, are you still defending them?
No. Well, I'm going to ask you a question. CES has an incredible global digital footprint because of all the media. So you are a global event digitally. Almost half of the people who answered the ECF Pulse said that they are adding digital extensions to their events for branding purposes, to stay in contact with the people that cannot make it there. What, if anything, do you do, not as an acceptor of media, but what is CES's strategy as far as any type of digital extensions of your 4-day event?
All right, Sam, when I say no virtual shows succeed, it's the concept of a buying executive or someone that's making purchasing decisions, walking around and walking themselves into a booth. It's just not going to happen. Look, the average person gets 200 emails a day. You're dealing with like 50 different things. The last thing you're going to start doing is going to websites and walking around trade shows. Everyone is too busy today. So that's very different than what you just said, which is extending your brand for 365 days, which is one of our goals, and we keep doing it. But the way our show has succeeded, in part in making us relevant, is a number of things. And I want to go through one quickly because I saw a person. Is Margaret Core here? So Margaret, who used to be an employee, I noticed something is I was so happy to see so many of our alumni here, number one, so many of our vendors, number two, and so many groups that I've spoken before, number three. So I counted, it's like we're an equal number. But Margaret Core was our head of marketing, and she came in my office one day, and she said, what do you think about putting the name International before our show? I was like, well, what does it entail? She said, not a lot. We have to change signs. We have to do stuff, change some logos and things like that. And I said, okay, let's do it. I didn't realize that was like the best decision we ever made. All of a sudden, oh, you're international now? Oh, wow. I want to go. All of a sudden, people are showing up from abroad. It was the coolest thing ever. Am I explaining that accurately, Margaret? Yeah, okay, and we eventually did drop the name Winter. So there's a simple thing you do. If you want to announce to the world, I had no clue this would work, but I do have the ability to say yes to smarter people than me, which makes a good CEO. So that's what happened with that, and that's the true story. It wasn't, Margaret put more thought into it than I did, obviously, but and then we also did a lot of things to stay global. I mean, we still invest heavily in agencies around the world. We bring press. We have scholarships for press that we think are from important countries. Our strategy is to go after the countries where we think we need the biggest exhibitors from and get their press to the show. So then what they read, the exhibitors in those countries, they have a good idea that we're important, and they think we're important. It is marketing, but it's very selective marketing. We also figure out what press are important, and we ask them to come. We ask them to speak. And as I was telling Galen Poss earlier today, it's an old trick in our world. Anyone if you ask them to speak, they usually show up. So your speakers should be the big fish, in a sense that everyone wants to not only come see or hear, but that you want them there also, because they'll become your advocates. And also, I think you have to make people feel like, especially, and this is what I think the nonprofit world could do especially well, is make people feel that that they own the show. And that's really important. So what we do is to also be relevant is we are aggressively looking for trends, and then we partner. Like we didn't know anything about drones or AR, VR, or things like that. We aggressively went out, found publications, found existing conferences, associations, and say, hey, you want to partner with us? And the partnership criteria we have is it has to be win-win. We want to make sure that they make money, we make money. I think that's usually better if you share gross revenue and the show producer is responsible for the net. But you want people increasing your top line. And you have, whoever can control the bottom line should be controlling it. And you know, if you have a show, you want everything to look like you're controlling almost everything, you might as well do that. But then again, if someone wants to bring in, they want to do something different, you listen to them, you hear them, you give them a budget. And we have, I don't know how many partnerships we have anymore, but we have so many. We used to call them pavilions, now we call them tech zones, and we call them marketplaces. I mean, it doesn't matter what you call them. And then we focused on new stuff. Everyone wants new stuff. I mean, one of the things that impressed me about our organization is there's a culture. Even though the big companies are there and active and they have the Washington lobbyists and they go to a lot of our meetings, it's a culture of respecting and appreciating small companies and startups. And it embeds everything from the very first board meeting I attended when the debate was whether to raise the cost of exhibiting, and the largest company CEO was chairman of our board and said, this is a rounding error to us. It's irrelevant what it costs. Plus, we have travel, we have building, we have other costs besides the raw cost of exhibit space. But we must always keep the show open so that anyone with an idea can enter this industry and expose it to the retailers, the buyers, the media, the partners, the investors. And that's a philosophy we maintain to this day. So we started something called Eureka Park a few years ago. In this past show, I think it was 1,200 different companies, a startup area. We have Shark Tank that's there doing, not only are they actually doing auditions there, but they funded people. I mean, Mark Cuban's walked around and he funded a lot of our exhibitors, and small is in now. And the thing that's changed in the last few years is not only small in, but big companies have come to the conclusion that they do not have the exclusive rights to innovate. And in fact, it's so difficult to innovate in a big company because of the decisions, all you have to go through to get to the top and invest money. And also because once you've made a bad decision, you can't get out of it. In other words, big companies will fund a bad decision for a very long time to keep it going because they can't kill it. And they can't adjust it, which is small. So big company CEOs, and I've talked to a lot of them about this, believe now that small companies is not only is a matter of acquisition in terms of a make-buy decision, but it could be just a strategic partnership, it could be mentoring, it could be being their first customer. That's really important. And now we have big company CEOs that require their entire exhibit team go to the Eureka Park area to see what's fresh and hot there, and that spirit of starting up. And we tell our Eureka Park exhibitors, come in with an open mind, good shoes, and prepare to listen. And also try to get, it's not only an elevator pitch, it's also what your display look. Get your message out so it could be received within just a few seconds. People know what you're doing. And don't be heavy on text, pictures are good, things like that. But we try to help our exhibitors succeed. But every Eureka Park exhibitor I've ever talked to is like exhausted and thrilled. And they've changed their business plan by the time they leave the show. And we keep getting more and more of these. I mean, honestly, it's not the most profitable thing we do. I mean, there's a lot of companies to deal with, and we do subsidize it. But it is now the buzz area of CES. I am the future of digital connected health. Wow, that's a great subject. I gave a speech on this a few weeks ago. And it was in California, and I attended 2 conferences on this. One was ours. There's a huge future there. It's really amazing. So you may think that I'm just being relaxed and looking good by pacing back and forth to try to reach. The truth, what I'm really doing is we have a step challenge in my office, and I'm trying to win. So I got this little device here, and it's working. So this is our future. Now, we tried to get all these people together in a room, and we do things with them, but it's such a huge area, and I'm seeing that more and more every day. This is just the beginning of what we can do in health, and there's so many different areas on that, because it all comes down to, believe it or not, phones. Because over 1 billion phones have been sold, and especially the smartphones contain over a dozen sensors. Those sensors now cost a few pennies each. And smart people have put those sensors together in a way which are sensing those things. Think about the society we live in today with older people. We're living longer. We're having fewer kids. We're allowing in fewer immigrants. We're in a full employment society. Our healthcare costs are going up, and we have no one to take care of us when we're getting older. So if you don't think technology plays a role in all of that, because we got to cut down our spending on healthcare. It's the fastest growing area still of our budget, and it's going to squeeze out virtually everything else soon. And technology now could solve many problems. We have to change our laws to allow new forms of healthcare and new ways of doing things. We have to look at fewer patient visits physically going there, because that often requires a caregiver back and forth, plus it's not very green. We have to look at remote monitoring and how we pay doctors and what we do. And we're changing things rapidly as a society. We've created this whole area of our show focused on healthcare, wellness, and fitness, sports, and it keeps growing and growing and growing. It's a very important area, but it's a good thing. All this ties up into what we do is innovation. And we try to, our message is that if you look at the major problems society has in healthcare, with the environment, transportation, with education, innovation is going to solve all these problems. The technology is already out there. It's a matter of piecing it together through these sensors, through algorithms, through devices, and of course through artificial intelligence. I do want to get back to Ninja, and I want to get to questions. The Ninja concept is one that's important, and I didn't finish the thought. And the thought of what ninjas do that no one else does is solve the problem creatively. And if you think of your employees and how you respect and treat and promote employees, I'll bet you're looking at the employees that solve the problems, not come to you and tell you there's a problem, or say, sorry, I didn't work. You want them to come to you and say, here's a creative way of doing it. If you hit a wall, you barricade through it, you jump over it, you become invisible, you pole vault, you make the wall disappear. You do something totally different. Life is not binary. Neither is problem solving. There's always a third, or fourth, or fifth, or sixth way of doing something, of attacking a problem. There's always another partner you could talk to, another venture, another way of getting into a company. So the problem solvers are the ninjas. And that's the attitude of black belt, of ninjas, and of employees. And on that note, I could go into like 60 different areas. I didn't talk about privacy or China, which I'd be happy to talk about, or the future of democracy in the world, which I think is really important. But I'll entertain any questions. Well, not from you, Sam. Anyone else? We got some back there. I don't want a fake question from you.
As always, Gary, enjoying it. I actually, if I can be so bold, have two questions.
I want to do my reveal, but go ahead.
We're hearing all the time now, you have to stay connected 24/7, 365 days of the year. Are we really setting up is that a real expectation, and do you see that as something that we're going to have to be doing, is staying connected 24/7? I know I don't want to stay connected 24/7 with everybody, and I don't want everybody to stay that connected with me. Just curious what you think.
What I think? My kids are not allowed to watch television unless it's in Chinese, for the most part. They do not have video. They are not allowed to play video games. They want phones. We allow our 11-year-old to have Wi-Fi. I think that too much technology is a real problem we're facing as a society. We're losing a connection with each other. We're losing the ability to socially interact. I think that's one of the things I think in hiring now is that people who are graduating now, they don't have basic social skills. And I think we have to recognize collectively as a society that technology has its place. It's a tool. It's not a total solution for life's problems. And what we're seeing is kids are dating less and less. They're having sex later and later. Now, some of you may think this is a good thing. I don't know. We're seeing, they're getting pornography on the internet at a very young age. They're bullying each other. Cyberbullying is so much worse than the bullying we had, in that you could attack a kid overnight as opposed to one-on-one. There's a lot of challenges that technology is presenting, and I think we have to take a position as parents. Number one, we have a responsibility. The technology is not the parent. The parent is the parent. Parent's job is not to let the kids do what they want or be the friend. The parent's job is to put limits on the kid and give your kid basic skills and confidence to know their place in the world and make good decisions. And I think a lot of parents are not doing what they should be doing. But I also think, in my position, I am the cheerleader for the technology industry, but I'll be the first one to say that there have to be limits on it. And I am not encouraged by the state of parenting I'm seeing today. So as an individual also, you have to create limits. As a worker, you have to create limits. With your employees, you have to create limits. I mean, the challenges I see with some of the tools today is like, I have to do some of my stuff on weekends. I don't want my employees to respond to me on weekends, but the devices I have don't allow me to hold that back. So in other words, I'm part of the problem. I realize because employees respond when they see, someone up the food chain sending them something. But I think we just have to be self-conscious of what we're doing and how we're educating our kids. And like my wife and I call them the dining dead, couples who sit together and they're both, or the whole family is literally online. I mean, I understand like when you're traveling on a trip like that, it's nice to put the kids and have some quiet in the car or on the airplane if you're flying. But we have to put limits on these. I mean, we always have. Every technology that's come along, whether it's our discovery and harnessing a fire so we could live longer and have food that lasts and have warmth, or the wheel, which allowed us mobility, or the printing press, which allowed us to communicate, or you name it. Society has evolved and said, here are some limits that we place on these things through law, through culture, through mores, through values, and we've adjusted and it's made our lives better. And I think we'll do the same with technology. The challenge is technology is evolving so quickly in so many different areas, and new services are created, and it's grabbing so much of our attention that we're losing our humanness, which is what we bring back as an industry, I think. We bring back that human touch. As sophisticated, and I agree, all the things we're talked about today we should be doing, all the personalization and all that, but turn it off, really. So.
Thank you. Well said. Then the second quick question kind of is an indirect relate. Obviously, GDPR was mentioned earlier today, and we all know about the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, and there are 19 other states in the country looking at data privacy regulation. Where do you think that's going to take us? And as an industry, what else should we be doing to address that? Because if we have to ask permission from our not so much members, but anybody we want to mail to, email to, just for their simple mailing address, I think we're going to see a major impact to our industry. And I haven't heard that we're doing a lot as an industry to look at those regulations.
I agree with you. And I'll put this in a bigger context. It affects us as a country. So the reason we're the most innovative, as I indicated earlier, is cultural, our constitution, our immigrant nature, our always pushing back, our kids asking questions why, our ability to take risks. But what also is our encouragement through our tax code, through our laws and rules of businesses to try things and do things and reach people, as you say. Europe has taken the other approach. Their value is on the individual only. Your right to privacy. You have a right to be forgotten. If you don't like something said about your internet, you could have it removed, even if it's true. You can erase history. You can erase convictions on the internet. And literally hundreds of thousands of takedown notices are processed by Google and Yahoo every week in Europe. Now, the next major economic battle, in my view, is going to be fought over artificial intelligence. Everything else is subsumed under that, whether it's self-driving cars, AR, VR, education, how you teach people, how you provide healthcare. It's all about artificial intelligence. Which is simply, artificial intelligence is basically creating machines, if you will, which learn from experience and start thinking like humans, more and more like humans, and they solve problems. So how are you going to get to artificial intelligence? Artificial intelligence requires a huge amount of data. And in China, there is no privacy. China is socially rating every citizen by next year. They already have about 10 million people which are not allowed to fly, get hotel rooms, and they're pushed down on dating websites. And their goal is to get everyone. You could, whether it's jaywalking, they'll mark you down, or if you affiliate on social media with people they don't like, then you're marked down. So your social media score is going to be everything in China. And why is that? Because China's government's number one concern is that there'll be a rebellion by their citizens. Why? It's one of the most polluted countries in the world. They're creating about a coal plant in China or elsewhere every week. And they have the highest death rate from lung cancer of any country that I know, and they have it at many. Lung cancer is one of their number one immigrants. So they're concerned about social unrest. They're concerned about their very polluted country. And out of fairness to them, they're trying to clean it up, but they're helping populate the world with coal plants. And the growing battle that I see in the next 20 years, which wasn't on your chart, which I think will be there for the record, is the United States And together with Europe and our focus on the value of the individual and liberty and the right to religious freedom, the right to vote for whom you want, the right to access the internet, the right to freedom of speech, the right to all these things we get as Americans because of where we live and our Constitution, is the exact opposite of what's in China. And in China, it's conformity. You can't step out. You can't criticize the government. You can't access the internet to what you want. They've walled off China from the world. And now they're using this Belt and Roads Initiative to use soft money around the world. The U.S. has withdrawn theirs. And there's going to be a battle for the hearts and minds of the world between the United States, Canada, our allies in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, against the Venezuelas, China, North Vietnam, and others. And it's a battle not only for economic supremacy and influence, it's a battle for culture and the value of the individual. And it's serious. It's more serious than even, in a sense, what you were asking was how can we run trade shows with this crazy regime? So you need to balance privacy against innovation. We need to give up certain things about ourselves, and we will give them up. We give them up when we go through airports for our security. We give them up at our kids' schools so they're safe. And we give them up online oftentimes, and we know we're clicking stuff we don't read. I just did it on Sam's thing just to vote. Because we trust the site or we want the information so badly. And it is up to government to set the alleyways or the guardrails so that we're not getting hurt as individuals to do that. But it's not to just adopt wholesale what Europe is doing. And I'll give you some examples of privacy where it is something that you would give up. And I've testified before Congress on this a couple of times now, and that is like, let's say you're in a multi-car collision and you're hurt and injured, and the first responders come. Shouldn't they know that you're among the living rather than the dead, and shouldn't they know what your symptoms are? There, you probably say yes. You're willing to give up your most vital information to save your life, of course, because it's reasonable. Same thing with something less vital, like windshield wiper information, or the temperature of the road, or whether you've gone over a pothole or not. You're always willing to give up information in return for a greater good, or even a greater societal good. And that's what we should be doing. And we should approach this privacy discussion with some recognition that there are trade-offs and there's reasonableness. And most, especially younger people, are willing to give up privacy. I'm happy. I Delta yesterday, I tried to do the facial thing. They said, oh, that's for international flights. I said, great, I'll do it Sunday when I'm going to Amsterdam. I want to move through the airport quickly. I'll give up my privacy. And most people, and the problem with GDPR is not only that, and the battle is going to be fought in part over whether states have rights to sue as attorneys general, and the trial lawyers are fighting so they could sue privately and screw every country in the world, every company rather in the world. I mean, that's what they want. And then you have the issue that's happened with GDPR is thousands of companies in Europe went under. And what you're facing, though, is a barrier to entry. Every one of our big companies, like Google and Apple and Facebook and others, they're going to meet GDPR or California or whatever. They'd prefer it be one solution nationally, but they'll survive. In fact, it'll be a barrier to entry so small entrants cannot come into a marketplace, so new companies cannot come into your trade shows. And that's the challenge I see with all this focus on privacy. I think we need a voice of rationality. I think and what we collectively bring, which I heard one of the speakers say earlier, is here, if you think, and this I'll do my reveal in the 2 minutes I have left, is that I think we have an obligation to speak up that we're not exercising, to do what's right and talk about these things. The people in this room are literally attracting millions of business executives to our events. And the business executives are generally a very quiet group. Oh yeah, you'll talk about taxes and things like that. It's a pocketbook. But in terms of innovation and where we're going as a nation and things like that, we are hopelessly divided. I mean, it's pretty grim right now. So I will give my reveal. So in early January, I decided that I'm going to try speaking up when I think it's the time to speak up on an issue. And that's why I was so gratified to see the presenter from Edelman talk about the fact that people want CEOs to speak up. And there's a thirst and hunger for that. And it first came to me, and I don't know how many live in the Washington area, but the federal government shutdown, which we had no stake in it at all. I mean, I'll admit we lost some attendees at our show. But after that, I said, you know, enough is enough. I'm a leader. I should do something about it. So we drafted an ad. I talked to a couple of my colleagues. We agreed on the ad, and we went out to unions and to trade associations. And within a week, we had 40 associations and unions, including the Chamber of Commerce, signed on to the ad, ready to go in the Washington Post. We said, enough is enough, without blaming either party. Now, what's interesting is the people that signed on immediately, I realize, are empowered association executives and union leaders. The ones that weren't were either critical because it wasn't criticizing the Democrats enough or wasn't criticizing the Republicans enough. or they were just scared that this is not what we do. We're in a, I'm not allowed to do anything except my own issue. And I think what we've had a failure of government in our country. And I will say, in my view, on both sides of the aisle. You could choose your aisle you want. It was good, interesting to see the difference between the both sides of the aisle. And that's the challenge we're facing. So it's time for business leaders to stand up and start talking about these issues. And I mean, less good examples of what I've done since then. I was at Davos, and Rachel Horn of my team will validate this. And we were watching Sir Martin Sorrell. We were sitting in the front row while he was being grilled by CNBC. Now, I don't know Sir Martin Sorrell. I might have met him once in my life. But apparently the CNBC reporter was all over him on this issue that somehow he started his company and left it because there was some controversy. And I was Googling what happened. I couldn't figure it out, why she's asking question after question. And he tried to answer each time, and she wouldn't let him go. And I think it was live on CNBC. And I looked it up, and you know what it was? It was that the guy visited a house of prostitution, and that his chauffeur complained that he worked too many hours driving into business meetings. And like, this is a problem worthy of CNBC and him giving up his corporate position. So I yelled out from the audience. I said, enough already. We came here to learn about marketing and advertising. He created the largest advertising firm in the country, and all you want to talk about is some, honestly, in my view, and I don't want to offend anyone here, a silly scandal. So the third thing I did was that week in Davos was I actually was at a dinner with Marissa Mayer, who had headed Yahoo. And she was a keynote speaker of ours, and I thought she did a terrific job. Now, you could debate what she did at Yahoo, for those who follow that stuff. But she was hounded out of Yahoo the very week she was giving birth to twins. And literally, it was a media campaign to get rid of her. And here this woman is having twins. And I'm pretty sure I tweeted about it, but I went up to her and I said, I want to thank you for the great keynote, but I also want to apologize to you that I didn't yell with my megaphone and say how unfair you were being treated. It was just horrible. And she says, you don't know the half of it. I mean, I was literally on my deathbed, and we almost had to contact, our lawyer said we had to contact Wall Street and make a statement before the stock market opened. He said, fortunately, I had the babies that day, and that solved my health problem. But she said it was, and you could just tell she's very emotional. And it was the wrong thing, and no one stood up. And what we're seeing, and part of it is with the hashtag #MeToo thing, there are gradations of horribleness. But there's also things that somebody did something 20 or 30 years ago, and we're counting them and killing their career and their family and their job, and no one is standing up for those people. So my commitment to myself is not only in the Me Too situations, which is just a slice of it, but in other things as well. I think you have to stand up and be heard, and I think the business community has an opportunity to stand up and be heard. And on that note, Sam's probably ready to go. Thank you very much. I really appreciate all of you and love what you're doing, and I'll be signing books. Thanks.
That's not an easy person to follow, Gary. Thank you again for sharing your passion. And I think that what the Edelman folks talked about as far as looking for leadership and authenticity, I think that if you would lead by example, that would be a good thing, because we're in a crazy place. I can tell you personally that every morning I scan a couple of newspapers, and I'm always less happy at the end of that experience than I am in the beginning of it. So any type of authentic, consistent, intelligent leadership would be certainly appreciated.